I feel like there's this feature on the EOS R that nobody ever talks about. So today, we're going to be talking about the compatibility of the EOS R and EF-S lenses and who should be using them. Well, hey, my name is Tony, if you don't know who I am, and today we're talking about EF-S lenses and the EOS R. To give you a little background history, I want to tell you about my journey with my camera bodies. I started off at a job where they wanted me to start doing some higher end social media things, so they bought me a Rebel T6i. Classic little camera in the Rebel line. It's a good little camera, and I started to learn all the manual settings, all of that fun stuff, and eventually started to pick up these EF-S lenses. They're a little bit cheaper, a little bit smaller, more affordable for people who are just getting started. Got an EF-S 24 pancake, classic little thing. I picked up a 10 to 18 millimeter, and then I got a 55 to 250 STM. About that point, I realized that I was maxing out the potential of that little T6i and bumped up to the Canon 80D, which is a phenomenal camera, one of my favorite cameras ever. And eventually, I started maxing out that camera as well. I started getting in a little bit more professional level freelance jobs, all sorts of different things. I needed the low light of the full frame sensor, and decided it was time for me to bump up to the Canon 5D Mark IV. Well, when I did that, I realized that I had all of these EF-S lenses that now I couldn't use. So I ended up keeping my Canon 80D just so I could use lenses like the 10 to 18 millimeter STM and the 55 to 250 STM, which is such a good, small, lightweight, portable, tiny package. I mean, that lens gets up to essentially 400 millimeters. It would take a huge lens for me to get that on the 5D Mark IV, so I kept the Canon 80D and the 5D Mark IV both in my bag at the same time. Here comes the Canon EOS R. I was a little skeptical. I actually took it on a ski trip with me for a weekend and just didn't connect with it. Eventually I came around, picked up the Canon EOS R right before I went on a trip to Africa, and that was the only camera that I took. Now, there's tons of advantages of the EOS R over the 5D Mark IV and vice versa, but today we're talking about one specific feature that I think doesn't get talked about much, and that's the compatibility of these EF-S lenses, the lenses that I had when I was developing and growing as a filmmaker and a photographer. All of these lenses that were tiny, they're affordable, they're lightweight, I love them, but I just couldn't use them on the 5D Mark IV. So now there is the ability to use them on the EOS R. There's some disadvantages and some features that may not work the same way that full frame lenses do. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to talk about some of the advantages, we're going to talk about some of the disadvantages, and then we're going to talk about who should be using EF-S lenses and why. Let's get into it. Here's some of the advantages that I think are really big features of using EF-S lenses on your EOS R. The first advantage is that, man, these lenses are cheap. Take, for example, the Canon 10 to 18 millimeter STM. This is a classic vlog lens, kind of made popular by people like Casey Neistat, who rocked the 70D and picked up the 10 to 18. You get that super wide view, and it's just perfect for getting close to the camera. Now, this lens is not a very fast lens. It's not great in low light, but it's cheap. I think now, I saw on Black Friday, you can pick this up for less than 200 bucks if you're looking on Canon's refurbished site. They're cheap lenses. Also, the 55 to 250, the 70 to 300, there's a ton of these really good entry-level lenses that, even though they're cheap, they're still really good glass that you can get great photos with. So, the first advantage is the price. The second advantage that I see with these lenses is the extended reach with these lenses. Think of it this way, you get an extra 1.6 times on your lens. So the 55 to 250 now all of a sudden reaches to 400 millimeters. You gotta rent a big old lens to be able to do that. And if you're on a safari and you're packing light and you're doing some backpacking, you want that reach, this is an easy way to achieve a really far focal length with your camera. Now let's talk about cropping in 4K, which is another advantage. A lot of people talk bad about the EOS R and the crop factor. Yeah, it's pretty significant, but did you know with the EF-S lenses, you don't have any crop on your 4K? It's a big advantage. And another advantage that I really want to mention once more is the fact that these lenses are significantly smaller. If you place a 10 to 18 millimeter or a 10 to 22 millimeter right next to a 16 to 35, there's some significant differences in size. Now, the glass is much better on the 16 to 35, but for most hobbyists and general just photographers, you're not going to see that much of a difference. Sure, there's a reason why L glass costs what it does, but if you're just getting started, if you've already got these lenses, they're good lenses. They really are. I've gotten some great photos with some of these very tiny, small lenses. Alright, so now let's take some time and talk about some of the disadvantages, maybe some of the things you may not know about the EOS R when it comes to these EF-S lenses. Obviously, the biggest disadvantage is that you're not using the full frame sensor's full advantage. It crops in a little bit, both for photo and video. When you're taking photos, it pushes that down to about 11.5 megapixels opposed to the full 30 megapixels, which can be a big deal, especially if you're in a once-in-a-lifetime kind of place. That's going to be a disadvantage. Also, with your video, you're going to notice there's a significant crop. Once again, that's just part of using an EF-S lens on your EOS R full-frame body. It has to crop in there, otherwise you're going to actually see the lens on the full-frame camera. For me, I get it, I understand. I mean, I use crop censored cameras for most of my life up until I started getting into some of these professional bodies. Crop censored it's just part of it. Another thing is that we use the C100, C200, all of those cinema lines, and none of those are full frame sensors. So I'm kind of used to a little bit of crop anyways. So for me, that's not a huge disadvantage, except for the fact that your photos are not the full 30 megapixels. I wish that they could figure out a way to still use all of that sensor, but still use your EF-S lenses. Now the problem is you'd have to really have that lens out far, or they'd have to do some wizardry, which, you know, sometimes that happens. Let's talk about the second disadvantage. The second one is there's no 60 frames per second when you're using EF-S lenses, which is a big deal for me, and I'm not really sure why that's the case. It doesn't make any sense to me. Come on, Canon. You just released a firmware update for the EOS RP, giving us 24 frames per second, which is awesome. Why? I know that the EOS R can handle 60 frames per second on an EF-S lens. So it makes no sense. If somebody knows more like why this technically cannot happen, leave it in the comments. But for me, like, I want to be able to shoot 60 frames per second. It feels a little bit like a crippling thing, kind of making me keep that ADD in the bag. I don't do that anymore, but you understand why. Okay, so number 3 is that you do lose some quality in the actual hardware of the lens. The glass isn't as good. Your lens is probably not going to be weather sealed like a lot of the higher end full frame lenses are. You know, it's just going to be lighter, which is going to lose a little bit of stabilization. It is a cheaper lens. There's no doubt about that, which is the disadvantage. And the fourth disadvantage that you may not know about with the EOS R using EF-S lenses is there are a few autofocus settings that you cannot adjust quite the same way that you can with a full frame lens, even the EF lenses. The RF is really going to open up the potential of your EOS R, and honestly, I still think that the RF lenses are outpacing the EOS R body, and it's time for a pro level body. So I can't wait for that to be released, and I'm probably going to pick it up as soon as it comes out, whether it's the high megapixel or like the pro body, like the 1DX of the R system. I can't wait for those because I feel that those RF mount lenses are designed for better cameras, and we're only going to see just an explosion of possibilities when we get some of these higher end bodies. Now let's take a few minutes to talk about who do I feel that should be using these EF-S lenses. If you're a professional, you've got a 1DX Mark II, you've got 70 to 200 millimeter lenses, you've got the whole works, the 85-1.4. You don't necessarily need to be using EF-S lenses opposed to those on your cameras. Keep using those. But if you just upgraded from the Canon 77D or the 80D or any of the Rebel line, you're getting into full frame camera, transitioning into full frame photography, you can still use those EF-S lenses that you have, which is a big deal. That means that you don't have to run out and spend $900 to $3,000 on a new RF lens because your camera doesn't support it. When I bought my 5D Mark IV, I had to figure out, okay, so what do I do now? I've got the Nifty 50, which works on mine, and that's about it. And you have to start building that lens. With the advantage of being able to use your EF-S lenses while you're transitioning up into higher end gear, you can still use those lenses that you have, and then you can outgrow them just like you did the camera body. I think that's a really cool thing. Another person that I think that would benefit from using EF-S lenses is somebody who's a travel photographer, does a little mix of photo and video, a lot of social media stuff. You're not gonna notice the difference between the megapixels on those two, whether it's 30 or 11.5, because you're uploading it to Instagram and they're gonna destroy the quality anyways. You need a light kit. Maybe you want a telephoto, maybe you want a wide, but you don't want to take 20 pounds worth of camera gear. Use some EF-S lenses. You're still going to be able to take multiple lenses with you, still be able to get beautiful shots, absolutely beautiful shots, and it'll be manageable on your trip. Now, the thing with the 60 frames per second probably bugs me most about this entire EF-S line on the EOS R. I really love 60 frames per second, but some people, they just never shoot in that higher frame rate. And if that doesn't bother you, hey, I say pull off, dust off some of those EF-S lenses and give it a shot and see what it looks like. So why don't we take a few minutes real quick. I'm gonna go out to the park and make a little video just using EF-S lenses. I'm gonna show you a few photos that I've taken with the EOS R, and then we'll kind of wrap this video up. All right. Okay, we just got to the park. It is a little bit colder than it was yesterday. Yesterday it was like 65 degrees here, 70 degrees in St. Louis, and it was beautiful. Today, not so much. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna find a place to look at some gear. I'll show you the setup. Right now, I'm using a EF 24mm f2.8 IS. I like this lens for vlogging. It gives me that beautiful depth of field, and just looks really nice. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna switch. I'll show you the lenses that I brought, then we'll go from there. Okay, here we go. All right, so found a nice little spot. I'll show you what I got here. This is the 55 to 250. We're gonna stick that, I think, on the Ronin. See what that looks like, because I mean, it's so light you can still balance it, and even though that it extends, I think it'll be fine. Then the other one I brought is the 10 to 18, which is a classic vlog lens. And so let's just see what that looks like right now. I'm gonna swap out both my my ND filter and the lens, put this one on there so you can see the difference. So this is full frame, this is 24 millimeter. Here we go, 10 to 18. All right, so now we are on the 10 to 18 millimeter. In fact, I don't even need my my ND filter, so I just left it over there for now. Man, this day is just beautiful. It's got like this beautiful like overcast coloring. I used to be all about the sunny days, but now, I mean, I can film all day long. I can get beautiful looking footage. Family portraits is amazing for this kind of stuff. Okay, so anyways, 10 to 18 millimeter looks pretty good. I'll just go through the settings real quick. 24 frames per second. I'm shooting, my shutter speed is at 1/50th then, because you want to double your frame rate. I am just leaving it as wide as I can for the aperture. Right now that's 4.5. If I go to 18 millimeters, which is here, that is 5.6. And you start to get a little bit more blurry background, or if I get closer like this, you get some blurry background, and it still looks pretty good. You can see this is quite a bit wider than the 24 millimeter full frame, which is kind of nice. And then what I did is I left my ISO on auto exposure for now while we're vlogging. when I start doing some more cinematic stuff, then I'll probably use C-Log and leave the ISO at 400 millimeters and go from there. So does that all make sense? Now let's, why don't I get some footage of just some cinematic footage and kind of go from there, and then I can kind of talk through what I think about the footage. Just so you guys know, I brought the Ronin S with me, so I've got that bad boy, and then I also have a slider that I may end up using or may not. I don't know, I figured why not bring it. Alright, so cue cinematic sequence. 3, 2, Okay, just finished up at the park. As you can see, you can get some really cool footage with these EF-S lenses. I think if I had somebody else with me, it'd be better because I could pull focus and all that stuff, but tried to get some movement and things like that, but it was fun. Now, these are some pretty cheap lenses. They do make some other lenses that are really nice, like the Sigma 18-35 f1.8. That's a killer lens I've heard for EF-S. Also the 17-55 millimeter f2.8. That's a Canon lens. I think it's like $500 or $600. But there's some options out there for some really good lenses. Oh man, it's a little chilly out here, but I'm having fun. It's a beautiful day. As you can see, it's pretty hard to get good footage with that 55-250 on a Ronin when you're fully extended, but it looks really cool. So, yeah. That's about all I have to say. Alright, well hopefully this video helped. Like you see, you can still get amazing footage with EF-S lenses. Those cheap couple $100 lenses that you've been using for years, you can still get good footage with those. So I encourage you, in the right situation, use those EF-S lenses. If this video helped, I'd love for you to like it. If you've got any questions or you know of another feature or disadvantage that maybe you get with the EF-S and the EOS R, leave it in the comments below. And if you haven't already, I would love for you to subscribe to my channel so that we can continue to grow together. Thanks guys, we'll see you next week.